Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Mark Sameth. He's author of the forthcoming book. It's coming out in 2 weeks, if I understand correctly. The Name, a history of the dual-gendered Hebrew name for God. So, hello Rabbi, thank you for being with us, and I can already wish you good luck with the book.
Thank you, Shmuel. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We are going to discuss the parsha of the week. In Parashat Tazria-Metzora, we continue the discussion of the laws of Tum'ah ve'Tahara, ritual impurity and purity. The parsha deals with birth and circumcision and with a disease called tzaraat, often mistranslated as leprosy. A person afflicted with tzaraat must dwell alone outside of the camp or the city until he is healed, and how very relevant this sounds today. The parsha begins with this pasuk, דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, אישה כי תזריע וילדה זכר, וטמאה 7 ימים כמי נידת דבותה תטמא. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she shall be unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her menstrual flow, she shall be unclean. So Rabbi, let's go back to what I commented on. Is it really easier to identify with such difficult parsha today than it usually is because of the coronavirus and because of social distancing and all the other things that we need to do?
Yes, I think it is, and I'll start, Shmuel, by saying, because we are recording this in the midst of this pandemic, and so I just hope that you and your family and your friends and everyone is well and stays well. And I wish we could go back to yesterday when this was these were impossible parshiot, Torah portions to relate to. Who has any interest in quarantine? Who has any interest in contamination of surfaces? And now, of course, it's very present for all of us. So yes, I think it's very, very, the themes, if not the details, the themes and the feeling of tension and upset in a community is very, very present for us. How do we manage this? How do we manage it physically and medically and scientifically? And how do we manage it emotionally so that we don't run away with ourselves, but we maintain a sense of equilibrium and balance and calm?
Right. And you mentioned that, the scientific approach that we take to our diseases today, but what we see in the Torah is an approach, more philosophical approach, and this whole concept of purity and impurity is something that in today's world we are not used to having.
It's true, and we can't. People have tried. I don't think that we can access what these terms actually meant at the time, but these were categories that defined our experience and defined the community. What areas are pure? What moments? What are the boundaries between purity and impurity? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and some of the details in the parsha might make people feel uncomfortable. Why would a woman giving birth be impure? Why would someone who's afflicted with a disease be considered impure? They might see it as somewhat problematic, or as if we cast people out, we turn them away from ourselves or from the community.
Right. So some people have talked about understanding this in terms of vulnerability and susceptibility. In other words, that after birth, it's destabilizing, physically destabilizing. The family constellation is destabilized. There are real concerns, especially in years gone by, but also again today, of infant mortality, and so it could be understood as a way of trying to set a boundary of protection. But again, my interest is not in in apologetics, but in trying to understand what uh, these terms might have meant. It's very, very difficult for us to access.
Right, and you say it's difficult to access. Is it possible for us to readjust it to our current days and make it relevant for us today? Okay, we don't understand what they meant back then, but when we read it today, can we use it in some way?
I would hope so. The rabbis were very inventive, very creative. Some would say very playful, in terms of how they understood. Here's the pshat. Here's the surface level of the text. Here's what the word seems to mean, and here's what we would like it to mean, or we can understand it to mean. I would say that maintaining a focus on the details, even if we don't understand the details, can be very, very instructive and helpful, rather than say, "Oh, this means nothing to us today." I would rather drill down. If I can give you an example
Sure.
From my book, um, so the feminine pronoun she is spelled correctly in the Torah only 11 times. All of the other times in the Torah, it's spelled as if it's the masculine pronoun he. And then the question is, so why this linguistic gender confusion? So in this week's Torah, the midrash on this week's Torah portion, Tazria, Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman says that the Adam, the original human being, was created as an androgyne, as a male-female being. That's from this week's midrash.
Right.
Now we go back to the original story in Genesis and Bereshit, and we look at it in context, and God creates this dual-gendered being, B'Tselem Elokim, in God's own image. Therefore, the implication being there, that God is also, so to speak, in a manner of speaking, as if it could be said, male and female. So the details are important.
Right. The name of your book is the name.
Sounds better in Hebrew.
Right. I must tell you that a few years ago I edited a book in Israel with the title Hashem that deals with the names of God. So the topic is somewhat similar as the name, and the title is the same title, only in Hebrew. But I think the exact details are somewhat different. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, on one leg, that's the sum and substance, is that I'm tracing the book back, tracing the name back as far as we're able to trace it via archaeology. And so we find the original version, or what Egyptologists consider the original version of the Tetragrammaton, was a trigrammaton. And we find it even today, if we could go there, in Soleb, Sudan. There's a monument, and there in hieroglyphics is the original 3-letter name that we know as the 4-letter name of God. So it traces it, and then what was known, what was unknown, what may have been known, right up through recent times. And some scholars have written on this before. This was written on in the most recently in the 19th century. A Vatican librarian wrote a book on this. He was relieved of his post. His book was banned. You can get it today. but it was only a few copies were printed. It was banned, and now you can find it. And this is exactly what he said. And if you go back to the 16th century, a French linguist, Guillaume Postel, wrote about this as well. So we have all sorts of hints to this through our literature. The Rambam hints at it, almost comes out and says it, and certainly in the Zohar and so forth. But this is not; it's not a new story. Um, it's been told before.
And you know, you just quoted one rabbi telling this midrash, but obviously, had you said the same thing without relying on some earlier sage, you'd be an outcast.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion, which has to do with the importance of tradition and relying on the sages. When do we go so far? The acher comes to mind, right? When do you go so far that you put yourself outside the community? But you know, even in the wherever you go, in the Orthodox world, in the Haredi world, in the Reform world, uh, Friday night, Kabbalat Shabbat, we're welcoming the Sabbath queen who marries again and again and again and again HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a wedding of sorts of the male and female
Boy
aspects of
kala,
God.
yeah, but we welcome the bride.
So, so that aspect, that understanding, at least that much of the understanding, is normative and celebrated in our tradition, and I think to the good.
Right, and I know we are no longer talking about the parsha, but I must ask the question: do you expect people who read your book to feel that it's highly controversial, or do you think it will easily be digested by all readers?
This I've never heard of. um, it's a serious work. I respond to some criticisms that I've already gotten. I had a short piece in the New York Times, which is not the place that most biblical scholarship is published. So I didn't have a lot of room. In my footnotes, I respond to some criticisms I've already had, and I anticipate some other criticisms because I want it to be taken seriously. But the bulk of the book is written with in hopes that it'll be accessible to anyone.
Rabbi Sameth, I'll mention the book again, the name, A History of the Dual-Gendered Hebrew Name of God. You can already find it on Amazon, and it's coming out in 2 weeks. Thank you for speaking about the parsha and about the book. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shmuel, thank you so much. Shabbat.